Okay, so thank you to everyone for being here. As you have heard, the reason that we're doing this presentation is because there is a proposal that will be voted on at this June's General Assembly for a big change to the Unitarian Universalist Association's Article 2 of its bylaws, which includes the principles and sources. So before I get started, a couple things. Would all the people on Zoom please stay muted? There should be a handout that includes the wording of the current Article 2 and the proposed changes. So if you are in the sanctuary, you should be able to get that. I'm sorry for the folks online, we don't have that for you. So let's just get started.
Anybody else need one?
I am lucky that I have slides that were prepared by the Reverend Dr. Cynthia Landrum, who is minister at First Parish Church of Stowe and Acton, Massachusetts. I have made many adaptations, but this has helped me a lot in understanding the changes to the current principles and sources. I am not an expert in the UU principles. I am not an expert in all of the ins and outs of this proposal. So just take what I say as my best understanding of what's going on. So in 1961, the Unitarian and Universalist churches merged. And it was not easy for them to come together. They believed alike in lots of things, but they also had lots of differences. So it took them some time to come up with a compromise, and that was these 6 principles. Because we are a faith that believes in the open revelation, that things are not set for all time, that things change constantly, the world changes, our understanding changes. The bylaws state that Article 2 needs to be revised reviewed every 15 years. So we started out understanding that these things we say in our bylaws about our principles are not permanent. They're our understanding at the moment. And as you can see, we had these first principles in 1961. Well, the 60s and the 70s, as we all know, were a time of great cultural upheaval. The women's movement, the anti-war movement, the environmental movement, the civil rights movement, lots of things were going on. Lots of things were going on in the UUA, but with regard to the principles, the biggest was the Unitarian Universalist Women's Federation, which was not happy with some of the language in the original 1961 Article 2 principles. They were not happy with things like love to man, the dignity of man, the ideals of brotherhood, men of goodwill. Those seemed to them to not include women. As I said, there were lots of other issues as well. These are just the easiest to identify. So after many years of negotiation and collaboration and coming together, in 1985, new principles were adopted by the General Assembly. Actually, they had to be voted on in 2 General Assemblies in 1985 and 1986. So if you look here with the color coding, you can see how the 1961 principles were transformed into the 1985-1986 principles. So 1961 Principle 1 becomes 1985 Principle 4, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Principle 2 becomes a whole new section, the sources. Principle 3 is 2 colors. That means that the first part becomes Principle 1, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And the end becomes part of Principle 5, the use of the democratic process within our congregations and society at large. 1961 Principles 4 and 6 both talk about justice. They both talk about making a better world, and they become parts of Principles 2 and 6, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, and the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. As you can see, justice is a big deal for us Unitarian Universalists. Principle 5 becomes another new section, the purposes. The new Principle 7 is new. Respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part comes from the awareness of the women's movement, of the environmental movement, of our interconnection to the rest of the world. There were also freedom of belief and non-discrimination sections in Article 2 in 1985, 1986. And then in the years since 1985 and 1986, things have continued to change. One of the biggest was in 1995, we added a sixth source, the spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions, which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. This is in keeping with our Principle 7. It's a big part of the growth of CUPS groups and our connection with pagan groups. In 2009, starting in 2006, the association asked for a 15-year review. And in 2009, they proposed changes to the purposes, the sources, the principles, the non-discrimination section, and the freedom of belief section. They failed on a narrow vote. But in 2013, some of those changes that were rejected in 2009 were made to the non-discrimination section. So it now became the inclusion section. And this list of areas that should not be cause for discrimination becomes a more general statement. Systems of power, privilege, and oppression have traditionally created barriers for persons and groups with particular identities, ages, abilities, and histories. We pledge to do all we can to replace such barriers with ever-widening circles of solidarity and mutual respect. So that's a change from 2013. In 2017, we changed the second source from words and deeds of prophetic women and men to words and deeds of prophetic people, because we had recognized by that time that the gender binary excluded many Unitarian Universalists, many people who did not feel included by the phrase women and men. We did not change the first principle from we covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of all people. We did not change that to all beings. We weren't quite ready to make that leap, perhaps because we didn't all want to become vegans. Also, in recent years, an eighth principle has been suggested and passed by individual congregations. As of last year, 156 congregations had passed it. I don't know what number it is now. But this was a movement that happened because of the UUA's issues with racism, discrimination, and the unhappy experience of many people of color and other marginalized groups in our faith movement. So the proposed eighth principle is journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. So this has been a big movement. It has, I think, been at the heart of much of the work of the Article 2 Study Commission that is happening now. And we will talk more about that later. So here are the current principles. I don't think I need to say a lot about them. I think we're all pretty familiar with them. Here are the current sources, and I think we're all pretty familiar with those. Current purposes. The Unitarian Universalist Association shall devote its resources to and exercise its corporate powers for religious, educational, and humanitarian purposes. The primary purpose of the association is to serve the needs of its member congregations, organize new congregations, extend and strengthen Unitarian Universalist institutions, and implement its principles. The current inclusion section we just talked about. The current freedom of belief section. Nothing herein shall be deemed to infringe upon the individual freedom of belief which is inherent in the Universalist and Unitarian heritages, or to conflict with any statement of purpose, covenant, or bond of union used by any congregation unless such is used as a creedal test. So that was a whirlwind tour through the 1985-86 version of Article 2. There will be time for questions and comments at the end. I do not expect people to have absorbed all of this in this short time, but this should give you a taste of what that all was. And now we're going to go over the proposed Article 2, the revisions that will be presented at this General Assembly. So this is the big graphic. The Article 2 Study Commission was encouraged to think big. Nothing was set in stone. So they started thinking about our UU values, which is a phrase that we've all heard and probably used many times, but was not discussed anywhere in our bylaws or any official document. There was no list of what our UU values were. So the study commission wondered if they could identify what UU values are. They started doing interviews. They talked to individuals and congregations from across the country, and they found that people kept identifying the same things as our UU values. Love is at the center. Love is at the center because the charge to the study commission put it there. And it put it there because it had heard, the Unitarian Universalist Association had heard from many people that they wanted love to be at the center. The other 6 values are around it in a circle, and they're in no particular order. This graphic has them in an order, but they could be in any order. They're all connected, they're all interrelated. Talking about one flows naturally into talking about the others, and love flows into all of them. So equity and justice seem to me to flow together naturally. They connect with generosity and interdependence, which connects with pluralism, and they all connect with transformation. The Commission has added a description of each value and the covenants arising from it, beginning with love. As Unitarian Universalists, we covenant congregation to congregation and through our association to support and assist one another in our ministries. Now, what I want to point out here is this emphasis on congregation to congregation. Our covenant was talked about as we congregations covenant, but people thought about that as individuals covenant with congregations, congregations covenant with the UUA. This is a new emphasis on a covenant congregation to congregation, peer to peer. So we draw from our heritages of freedom, reason, hope, and courage, building on the foundation of love. Love is the power that holds us together and is at the center of our shared values. We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love. And then it goes on to list the other shared values which are inseparable from one another. Equity. We declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. We covenant to use our time, wisdom, attention, and money to build and sustain fully accessible and inclusive communities. This comes almost directly from the first principle. inherent dignity and worth of every person. The end, build and sustain fully accessible and inclusive communities, comes from the spirit of the eighth principle. Generosity is the next value. We cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. We covenant to freely and compassionately share our faith, presence, and resources. Our generosity connects us to one another in relationships of interdependence and mutuality. Where does this come from? Well, generosity, the compassion, comes from principle 2, and interdependence comes from principle 7. Those are the 1985-86 principles. The next value is interdependence. So interdependence was mentioned in generosity, and here it is a value in and of itself. We honor the interdependent web of all existence. We covenant to cherish Earth and all beings by creating and nurturing relationships of care and respect. With humility and reverence, we acknowledge our place in the great web of life, and we work to repair harm and damaged relationships. Obviously, this is coming a lot from the 7th principle, interdependent web of all existence. What I especially notice is that with humility and reverence, we acknowledge our place in the great web of life, and we work to repair harm and damaged relationships. Part of our covenant is that we acknowledge that harm has been done to our planet, to our relationships with our planet, and to our relationships with each other, and that we need to work to repair that harm. Justice. Again, a big deal for Unitarian Universalists, just as was mentioned in our sermon today. We work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all thrive. We covenant to dismantle racism and all forms of systemic oppression. We support the use of inclusive democratic processes to make decisions. Now, justice, as I said, came from principles 2 and 6, I think, in 1985-86. It also comes from the proposed 8th principle, build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community and dismantle racism and all forms of systemic oppression. Justice, as I said, comes from principle 2 and principle 6. And the use of the democratic process, which is here phrased as the use of inclusive democratic processes, comes from principle 5. Transformation is the next value. We adapt to the changing world. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian and Universalist heritages, never complete and never perfect. And we'll talk about that again in a little bit. But as we've said, this is fundamental to Unitarian Universalism, that our knowledge, our understanding is never final, and we change as the world changes. Pluralism. We celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. So on this slide, we see that principle 3 contributes to both pluralism and transformation. Acceptance of one another can be found in we embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. An encouragement to spiritual growth can be found in transformation. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. And again, in pluralism, principle 4, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, is found in the pluralism covenant. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. So we just did another whirlwind tour through the proposed values and covenants. This slide shows you what remains in the proposed Article 2 from our current UU principles. So everything in color is found in the current proposal. Everything in color, everything in color in the current principles is found in the proposal to the 2023 General Assembly. One thing I will point out that is not found anywhere in the 2023 proposal is peace. That is not mentioned in any of the values or any of the other parts of the proposed Article 2. But Article 2 is more than just the principles. One big part is the sources. And the sources have become the new inspirations section. The study commission didn't want to do another list, which would inevitably leave out something important to someone. For example, nowhere in this list are Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism, other new inspirations. They felt that a full list would be unworkable, so they tried to describe our inspirations in a paragraph instead. As Unitarian Universalists, we use and are inspired by sacred and secular understandings that help us live into our values. We respect the histories, contexts, and cultures in which they were created and are currently practiced. These sources ground us and sustain us in ordinary, difficult, and joyous times. Grateful for the religious ancestries we inherit and the diversity which enriches our faith, we are called to ever deepen and expand our wisdom. Purposes. The Unitarian Universalist Association will devote its resources to and use its organizational powers for religious, educational, and humanitarian purposes. Its primary purposes are to assist congregations in their vital ministries, support and train leaders, both lay and professional, to foster lifelong faith formation, to heal historic injustices, and to advance our Unitarian Universalist values in the world. The purpose of the Unitarian Universalist Association is to actively engage its members in the transformation of the world through liberating love. A couple of things to mention. Training lay leaders is a new area where the UUA feels it needs to make an effort. Also, a big thing that's been added, healing historic injustices and actively engaging its members in the transformation of the world through liberating love. That is not found in the current purposes. We've talked a lot about the inclusion section. What is changed here is an addition of, we truly welcome all persons who share our values. That was not in the previous version of the inclusion section. And we commit to being an association of congregations that empowers and enhances everyone's participation, especially those with historically marginalized identities. Freedom of belief. Congregational freedom and the individual's right of conscience are central to our Unitarian Universalist heritage. Congregations may establish statements of purpose, covenants, and bonds of union so long as they do not require that members adhere to a particular creed. The study commission wanted to avoid the legalistic language which they said many people had found confusing, and so they rewrote the freedom of belief section. They also added the right of conscience, and they didn't feel that that was much of a big change. So this is where it stands. We have the 85, 86 principles now as they've been tweaked. We have a proposal for General Assembly in June. In April, anyone will be able to submit an amendment to the current proposal. You don't have to be a delegate. At the end of April, all approved amendment proposals will be posted on the Article 2 Study Commission site, including name and contact information for the individuals who proposed the amendment. So anybody who wants to amend something can propose it. And then in May, there's going to be an effort to take all of those many, many amendment proposals and put them together into a smaller number that might be workably managed at General Assembly. So there will be 3 amendment discussion workshops, and people can also organize themselves and contact other people using the contact information that was presented on the website at the end of April. And then after that, it will be up to delegates at General Assembly, and we don't need to talk about that anymore. So thank you for listening to me talk about this all so quickly. And now we're going to hear from 3 members of the congregation who are going to talk about their views, their perspectives on the proposed changes.